Tsavo Plains, early spring. The light had just begun to rise, painting long, pale streaks across the edges of the dry fields. Dew clung to grass blades, quiet and silver. A low breeze moved through the tamarind trees like a breath being held. And from somewhere near the edge of an old irrigation trench came a sound, a thin, cracked whimper that barely rose above the rustle of dry leaves. The man had heard it before. Sounds like that, far off and fragile, often turned out to be nothing more than the wind catching through a gully. But this was different. It stopped, then came again, not loud, not frantic, just steady like something too tired to cry properly anymore. He paused where the soil dipped low behind a scatter of stones, then stepped down into the sunken path, following the faint pull of the noise. The trench was half-collapsed and shallow, filled with wind-blown twigs and baked clay. One side dipped farther down where erosion had hollowed it out over time, revealing a dark cavity behind a mess of roots. That's where the sound came from. He leaned in slowly, lowering himself to his knees, careful not to startle whatever was inside. The earth smelled of damp clay and moss. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the shadow. Then he saw it. Pressed against the rear wall, half covered in dirt, was a puppy, small, no more than a few weeks old, with slick fur matted in patches and a body so still it looked sculpted. Only the eyes moved, dark, wide, while barely blinking. The pup didn't cry when the man spoke. He didn't lift his head. He only breathed, shallow and slow, as if even that was too much. The man didn't reach in right away. He watched first. The front paws were tucked under the chest, motionless. One side of the belly rose and fell, faint as the wings of a trapped insect. The hind legs were twisted unnaturally under a mass of dried silt. The dog had likely fallen or been pushed in days ago, then buried halfway by rain-washed soil and wind-blown debris. The ground around the cavity was fragile. One wrong move could bring the rest down on him. He moved slowly, clearing away branches and roots with his hands, inch by inch. The dog didn't move. When the soil gave a sudden crack under pressure, the man froze. His breath came in tight, careful draws. After some time, he leaned back, thinking through the angles. A full body lift wouldn't work. The puppy was wedged in too tightly. He stood and stepped away from the trench, walking back toward his small hut near the edge of the field. A soft clanging came from inside as he gathered what he needed, an old grain sack, a shirt, and a water flask. When he returned, the wind had picked up. It moved the grass in slow waves. The pup's eyes were still open when the man knelt again, still watching, still blinking, not in fear, not in expectation, just watching, like there was no more energy left for anything else. He poured a small stream of water into a fold of his palm and held it near the edge of the hole. The dog didn't move. He poured a few more drops closer. A weak flick of the tongue reached toward the edge, missed, and fell still. The man whispered something, soft, low, just enough to let the dog know he wasn't alone. Then he began to dig. Each motion was measured. He cleared a space wide enough to insert his hands under the dog's ribcage, careful not to jostle the buried back legs. The shirt was wrapped around his arms, a cushion between bone and grip. When he finally slid his hands beneath the dog's belly and chest, he felt the tremble. Not from fear, from strain, the kind of strain that lives in a body that's held still for too long. The lift was slow. The dog didn't yelp, didn't move, as if the world outside the hole was no longer something he recognized. Dirt fell in small cascades behind him as the man rose and held the body against his chest. Warmth met cold. A heartbeat fluttered somewhere beneath fur. There was no struggle, just surrender. Back at the hut, The man placed the pup on a mat just outside the door, still wrapped in his shirt. He filled a shallow lid with warm water and placed it nearby. The pup didn't rise. He curled slightly, then went still again, eyes half closed. All morning the dog lay there, unmoving. A single fly landed near his eye. The man brushed it away. In the sun, the pup's fur dried in patches, revealing the sharp curve of his ribs, the hollow beneath his belly, the bruised skin along one flank. He wasn't just lost, he was depleted. Every sound he made was smaller than the one before. And by mid-afternoon, even the weak whimpers had stopped. Still the man didn't move him indoors. He sat nearby, cutting small strips of old fabric, dampening them with water, wiping the dog's mouth, paws and back. Once, near dusk, he pressed a finger gently beneath the dog's jaw, searching for breath. It was there, faint, but there. A bird landed nearby, picked at the dry grass, then flapped upward again. The air cooled, shadows grew longer, and then, as the last edge of light pulled over the rim of the trees, the dog moved, not much, just a twitch of the front paw, a slight shift of the shoulder, a blink slower than the rest. His nose twitched, and his tail gave a flick, small, tired, but there. The man leaned in, said almost nothing, only a whisper. "You're safe." That night the stars came early. The wind fell still. The shirt the puppy lay on was damp with warmth and dust. Inside, a kettle hissed quietly on the old stove, untouched. Outside, the puppy slept in curls, nose tucked into his side. He hadn't eaten, he hadn't stood, but he'd moved, and in that stillness something had returned to him. The flannel shirt was worn thin, its red checks faded from sun and time, sleeves torn from seasons of work. The man folded it once, then twice more, shaping a cradle no larger than his forearm. By morning, the soil had hardened where he'd dug the night before, and the narrow path to the irrigation trench was lined with his own quiet footprints, pressed deep into the dust. The puppy hadn't moved since sunset. His body had shifted slightly during the night, not from effort, but from gravity. The fur along his back had dried in stiff clumps, and a soft ridge of dust lined the corners of his eyes. His mouth was slightly open. Not panting, not gasping, just open, as if he'd forgotten to close it. The man knelt by the hole again. He didn't speak this time. He just set the folded flannel shirt beside him and reached in slowly, letting the shadow of his hands pass first, not the skin. When his fingers touched the dog's side, he felt a twitch. Not a pull, not a struggle, just the faintest recoil, the instinct to flinch even when the body can't follow through. He worked from the front legs first, sliding one arm beneath the chest and the other beneath the hindquarters where the limbs had gone limp. The shirt was wrapped around the animal's belly like a sling, and for a moment, as the dog was lifted free of the hole, the body dangled, weightless, like fabric, before it settled against the man's chest. No noise came, no movement, but the warmth was there, a slow, pulsing warmth that hadn't been felt the day before. He carried the puppy back along the same trail, his footsteps slower now, more measured. The flannel cradled the ribs gently, pressing in just enough to hold the body still. The man kept one hand curled around the pup's front, where the heartbeat thudded slow and shallow beneath the sternum. Each beat seemed separated by seconds. Back at the porch, he laid the flannel down on the woven mat just beyond the threshold, where the sun reached across the boards. The pup didn't move. His legs lay bent beneath him, but not tightly. His tail curved in a slight hook. The eyes stayed closed, though the lashes twitched once when the wind passed. One ear bent forward, then relaxed again. The man filled a ceramic bowl with warm water and placed it near the pup's nose. The dog didn't drink. He didn't even sniff. Instead, The man dipped the corner of the flannel into the bowl and touched it to the pup's lips. A smear of mud softened and ran down the chin. Still no response. Near noon, the wind grew stronger. Dust lifted in soft clouds along the edge of the fields. The man dampened another cloth, wiped the dog's eyes, then its paws. Slow, careful strokes that left small trails of clean fur behind. He whispered once, "It's all right." Just once. The pup stirred then, barely. A slow shift of his weight, like a leaf curling in heat. The front paw moved an inch, then stopped. By early afternoon, the clouds rolled in, thick, grey, and pressing low. The porch darkened. The man knelt beside the mat again, placing a tiny bowl of mashed lentils and broth on the side. Not expecting the dog to eat, but offering the scent anyway. He'd seen animals wait for days before trying again. He'd also seen them slip away between blinks. The puppy sniffed once, flinched from the smell, and buried his nose into the flannel. It was a gesture more than a decision, a small sign that he was still present, still aware, even if his body couldn't yet answer. The man stayed near, whittling a piece of driftwood into small, curved strips. Now and then he glanced at the pup. Once, when he brushed a gnat from its snout, the pup's jaw tensed, as if remembering hunger, but still he didn't eat, didn't drink, just breathed. As the day aged, the clouds began to break. Sunlight passed between them in streaks, golden and slow, falling across the yard in long, quiet patches. The breeze carried the smell of tamarind and dust. A bird landed near the railing, clicked its beak twice, then lifted off again. The land seemed to pause. Then, without warning, the pup's legs stretched outward, just one, the front left, slow and trembling, the paw unfolded, pads facing up, claws dull against the shirt. The leg hovered, then dropped again with a soft thud against the mat. The movement was unsteady, unfinished, but it had come from inside. The man didn't speak this time. He only watched. The pup's chest rose higher than it had all day. His ribs pushed against the fabric. Then his tail moved, a soft, slow wag that stopped midway through its arc. It was enough. By dusk, and the dog had turned himself slightly, not a full roll, just a shift. His back now faced the open air, and his head pressed into the warmth of the cloth. The ears were less folded, the jaw no longer hung open. The bowl of water remained untouched. The food sat cooling in the bowl. But the mat beneath the pup now bore the shape of a living thing, curved, cradled, soft with breath. The wind settled into the ground as the sky deepened to indigo. No more words were spoken. There was nothing left to urge. The man stepped inside quietly, leaving the door ajar. The puppy lay alone on the porch, wrapped in red flannel and stillness. But when the first star appeared overhead, the tiniest sound broke the quiet. Not a bark, not a whimper. Just a breath, long and slow, like something remembering how to exist again. The morning came without hurry. Pale light spread slowly across the yard, glinting off dew-damp boards and the rim of the water bowl left beside the sleeping pup. He hadn't stirred much in the night, but his body now lay stretched instead of curled, ribs still visible, but no longer hollowed. His fur, though patchy, had taken on a dull sheen. And when the man stepped onto the porch barefoot, the puppy opened one eye. There was no greeting, no tail thump, just a blink and then a faint twitch of the nose as the scent of warm food reached him. The man crouched low, ladling softened rice and lentils into a shallow metal dish. He set it just beside the dog's paws, then stepped back, waiting. The pup didn't rush. He sat still for a long while, watching the bowl like something uncertain whether it was real. Then, with a slow motion, he lifted his head and leaned forward. His tongue flicked once, then again. The third time, he pulled a single grain of rice into his mouth, chewed noiselessly, and swallowed. It took nearly 20 minutes for him to finish half the bowl. He paused often, rested between bites, and flinched whenever the wind picked up. But he ate, not because he was hungry, not yet, but because something inside him had begun to allow it. Afterward, he lay down again, head resting on the crook of his front leg. But then something changed. He looked up. It wasn't sudden. The movement was gentle, almost casual. His ears turned first, one angling toward the edge of the clearing, then the other. Then came his gaze, lifting, fixing not on the man or the bowl or the porch rail, but beyond. The trees at the far end of the yard stood still, their shadows stretched thin across the dry ground. Behind them, the earth sloped into the gully where the trench had split. The same place he'd come from. The pup whined, low, drawn out, a sound different than hunger or pain. It carried a question in it, something hollow and waiting. The man noticed. He stood where he was, following the dog's gaze, then slowly stepped toward the tree line. The pup watched him go, eyes never blinking. A second whine rose from his throat, thinner this time. The man turned once to look back. The pup hadn't moved from the mat, but his ears were up. Alert, his whole frame had tensed in a way it hadn't since the rescue. The man crossed the field slowly. The grass crackled beneath his feet. The hole where the pup had been found looked smaller now, just a scar in the earth. Around it, the ground bore marks from digging, dragging, lifting. But the trench itself had gone quiet. He didn't go into the hole again. He circled it once, eyes scanning the grass, the brush, the shallow hollows nearby. Then, not 10 feet from where he stood, something shifted. It was slight, just a quiver in a heap of dried grass pressed beneath a thorn bush, but it was enough. He stepped closer, knelt low, and waited. The grass moved again. He brushed it back gently, parting the dead stalks with his fingers, and there, pressed so tightly into the ground she seemed part of it, was another puppy, smaller than the first, darker in coat. Her body was curled into a tight spiral, back legs tucked beneath her chest, muzzle buried under her front paw. She didn't raise her head, didn't make a sound. Her eyes were open, but glassy, unfocused. The man exhaled slowly. He reached beneath the pup, feeling for breath before lifting. The ribs were even sharper on this one. Her skin sagged along the joints, but her chest rose and fell. Barely. Enough. He gathered her in the same flannel shirt, now freshly laundered and sun-dried on the line earlier that morning. The fabric wrapped around her like a cocoon, cradling her bones with more warmth than she'd likely felt in days. Back at the porch, the first puppy lifted his head as the man approached. This time, his tail flicked, just once. His ears twitched forward. The man knelt down, placed the new pup beside him, and stepped away. The reaction wasn't immediate. At first, the two dogs lay side by side without recognition, the male curled slightly away, uncertain. The female remained still, breathing shallowly, her eyes flickering open and closed. But after some time, after the breeze had passed and the light had begun to shift again, the male scooted forward. He touched his nose to her flank, sniffed, then paused. She stirred. A low sound, not a whimper, more a breath, came from her throat. Her paw moved, pressing against his shoulder, their heads bent toward each other, slow and awkward, like branches reaching in wind. The man watched from the doorway. He didn't speak. There was no need. He set another bowl beside the pair, this one filled with broth alone. The female didn't drink, but she licked once, then twice, letting the liquid gather at her lips. The male stayed close now, his body curved gently around hers. When she shivered, he shifted forward, touching his side to hers. The warmth moved between them, not fast, but steady. The flannel beneath them darkened slightly from damp fur and breath. By evening, the sky had turned violet. The man lit no lamp. He stood barefoot at the edge of the porch, arms folded, watching the pups curl against each other in the final stretch of sunlight. Neither moved much, neither made a sound, but their eyes had closed. Not from exhaustion this time, but from rest. A breeze stirred the branches again, scattering thin leaves into the grass. And in that quiet space between wind and stillness, two small bodies leaned together, alive. The night held a softness it hadn't offered in days. No wind passed through the tamarind trees, and the air sat warm, still, and close. On the porch, beneath the hanging edge of the tin roof, the two pups lay curled inside the same flannel cloth, their bodies pressed so tightly together it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. The male was slightly larger now, not by much, but enough to shift the weight of the blanket where his rib cage rose and fell. His coat, though still patchy, bore the faintest trace of its natural shine. The female, thinner and more fragile, hadn't moved since she was placed down. Her head rested in the crook of his shoulder, breath whispering shallow patterns against his fur. One of her hind legs twitched once, then stilled. The man had placed a folded cloth beneath them, layering it with warm stones wrapped in burlap. He watched from inside the doorway, quiet, unmoving. A kettle simmered low behind him, its warmth drifting toward the open space where the pups lay. He didn't try to feed them again that night. The bowls had already been offered, their contents barely touched. Instead, he pressed a small dish of water close to their noses and set a dim lantern on the edge of the porch, casting soft light over their bodies. Hours passed this way, slow, uneventful, until the rhythm of breath began to change. At first it was subtle. The female pup, once so still she'd seemed lifeless, exhaled in a longer pull, her ribs lifting higher than before. Her nostrils twitched. Then, as though stirred by the sound alone, the male shifted slightly toward her. His muzzle brushed her ear. She responded, not with a sound, but with a tilt of her head that let her neck rest along his. They didn't open their eyes, they didn't lift their legs, but something inside their small bodies had chosen to respond, not in panic, not in fear, but in recognition. They knew the shape beside them, and it was enough to try. By midnight, their breathing matched, slow, rhythmic, deepening. The flannel cloth, now rumpled and damp with shared warmth, had bunched around their shoulders. One of the male's paws rested across the female's front leg, the toes twitching now and then in small reflexes. The man stepped out once more, gently adjusting the edges of the blanket to keep them covered, but didn't touch them beyond that. He said nothing, just listened. A moth hovered near the lantern flame, wings fluttering soundlessly before retreating. In the distance, a nightjar called twice, its voice dry and short. Then silence returned. The pups slept through it all. When morning came, the world hadn't changed much. The sky was pale and cloudless, the air just beginning to shift with heat. But on the porch, the first movement came not from the man, but from the pups. The male lifted his head first, not fully, just enough to stretch his neck and blink at the light. He sniffed the air, then turned to nuzzle the side of the blanket. The female stirred next, letting out a soft breath as her body shifted forward, her front paw uncurled. The two met halfway, nose to nose, a slow, quiet nudge. Neither stood. but both were sitting now, bodies upright though unsteady. Their heads tilted toward the edge of the porch where the yard opened wide, and the light grew golden against the grass. The man crouched nearby, resting on his heels. He didn't reach for them. He only placed 2 fresh bowls of broth and crushed lentils nearby. Then he waited. This time the pups responded. The male rose first, his legs wobbling beneath him like sticks too thin to carry weight. But he walked, 3 steps, then 4, before dipping his nose into the dish. The female followed, slower, dragging one back leg as she moved. But she made it. Side by side they ate in silence, pausing only to glance toward each other between bites. When the wind picked up, both lifted their heads. The scent of soil, leaves, and distant cattle drifted in. Their ears turned toward it. The male gave a single low whine, not in distress, but as a sound of noticing. The female lowered her body again, but didn't curl this time. She rested on her side, breathing easy. By midday, both pups had ventured off the mat. Not far, only a few steps into the yard, but far enough for the sun to catch the rough texture of their fur, the healing patches along their sides, and the marks of resilience etched into every fragile step. They didn't play, not yet, but they explored, pausing often, returning to one another every few minutes, as if to confirm the other was still near. They nosed the soil, watched the birds, and when they grew tired, they returned to the same folded cloth, lying side by side again, heads touching, breath slow. The man sat nearby, hands resting on his knees. He didn't speak. The flannel cloth shifted slightly in the breeze, its corners fluttering like soft flags. 2 shapes nestled in its center, no longer curled in pain or silence, but resting in slow, full breath. The porch, once lined with shadows, now carried warmth. And for the first time since their rescue, there was no sound of struggle. Only stillness and the quiet rhythm of healing. 2 hearts beating in unison beneath the sun. Weeks passed in quiet rhythm. The pups grew slowly, not in leaps but in steady, grounded ways. First filling out their narrow frames, then thickening at the neck and shoulders until their movements no longer wobbled. They ran small loops across the yard now, play soft and clumsy, punctuated by long rests beneath the porch beams. The male led, cautious but eager. The female followed, head low, alert to sound. They were not loud, not wild. They had been too close to stillness for that. But they were alive, fully, completely. The man built a short fence around the outer edge of the clearing to keep them safe, but he never tethered them. Each evening, as the sun slipped low, he sat on the steps and watched them circle one another in the dust, nipping, nudging, and curling into the same worn flannel that had carried them through. It still lay folded on the porch floor. Its threads pulled loose along the seams, still holding their scent. By the 3rd week, they began to sleep apart. Not far, just one curled beside the door, the other in the shadow of the steps. When one stirred, the other always woke. They moved like matched breath, shaped by the memory of survival. When the call came from the shelter, the man didn't answer right away. He sat with it in his hand for a long while, thumb pressed against the rim of the wooden phone base, eyes on the pup sleeping near his boots. But something had settled inside them, something ready. He could feel it. They had grown in ways no longer just about safety. The shelter was small, rural, the kind that rarely had more than a dozen animals and even fewer visitors. The woman who ran it knew the man well. She didn't ask for names or details. She just said quietly, "There's someone I think should meet them." And so, 2 days later, before the heat rose, he brought them in. The pups didn't resist, he didn't crate them, he led them with slow steps, voice low, and they followed, side by side, tails lifted gently behind them. The truck ride was quiet. They lay curled together in the bed, the wind teasing their ears, eyes blinking slowly as trees passed overhead. At the shelter gate, a woman waited. She was in her 40s, perhaps older, with wind-marked skin and hair pulled back beneath a faded scarf. Her hands stayed folded in front of her, unmoving, as the pups approached. The man opened the truck door and stepped aside. The dogs hesitated, then jumped down, not fast, but without fear. The woman knelt, and for a long moment no one spoke. The pups stood still a few feet away. Then slowly the male stepped forward, tail swaying once, then again. The female followed, pausing just before reaching her. The woman reached out her hand open, low to the ground. The female sniffed first, then nudged her palm. The male licked her knuckle once, softly. The woman inhaled, quick, silent, then her hand curled around the pup's muzzle, resting there. "My daughter," she whispered. "He looked just like this." The man said nothing. He only nodded. She'd lost him, she explained, in a storm the season before. A young mutt swept away near the river's edge. They searched for days. She and the girl had waited by the bend each evening, calling until their voices cracked. No sign, not even prints. But when she looked at these two, she saw something she hadn't known how to hope for. Not a replacement, not even resemblance. Just continuation. A sense that not everything had been lost to water. She adopted them both. No questions, no renaming. On the way home, she let them ride in the front cab with the window cracked. They leaned on each other in the passenger seat, quiet, watching the road unfold. Back at the farm, the man stood alone on his porch. The mat was empty now. The flannel still lay where it always had, but no weight pressed against its folds. He didn't move it, didn't wash it. He just stepped down the stairs and crossed the yard, heading once more toward the edge of the trench. The hole was gone. Weeks earlier, after the second pup had been found, he'd filled it in, shovelful by shovelful, until the earth rose level again. He hadn't packed it tightly. He left it soft. And when the rains came soon after, wildflowers spread across its surface in crooked patches, tiny yellows, pale purples, white blossoms like threads of linen. They grew thickest where the pups had once been. He stood there now, watching as the wind moved over them. The petals shifted in waves, bending toward the sun. No sound came. No cry. No breathless call. Just light. And in that light, the memory of two small shapes, once buried, once broken, now whole. He turned back to the porch. Behind him, the field stayed quiet. The flannel lay folded, the bowls were cleaned, and somewhere down a long dirt road, two pups stood in a doorway beside a child with her hand on their backs. They weren't waiting anymore.